Heather Grant, and today we're here with Luana Rubin, who every year travels in the third week of January to the Tokyo Quilt Show. It's the largest attended quilt show in the world, held at the Tokyo Dome. Tell me about it, Luana. I mean, this has been on my bucket list forever.
It is a really amazing show, and there are 35 to 40,000 people who come in every day. All kinds of quilts, traditional, Japanese, contemporary. And one of the things I've noticed lately is there are more quilts that remind me of modern quilts, and that's what I wanted to share with you today.
Well, I'd love to see it. As a modern quilter, Japanese quilt making has always been so inspirational to me. I think as quilters, it's one of the greatest areas of inspiration for us. So you took some great images of this show. Why don't we start talking about them?
Yeah, well, one of the categories that I really love is the wa category. And traditionally, this category is full of indigo fabrics that have been recycled and cut up and made into quilts. And when you walk in, this time when I walked in, there was this fabulous quilt, the first place winner of the wa category. And it was full of recycled indigo stencil, but also yarn dye prints. But what I found interesting was the kind of Sashiko stitching that was kind of a gestural movement across, and you can see the close-ups, that stitching that just sort of bursts out into the dark border.
Yeah, I mean, when I see this quilt, this really just makes me think about, well, this is what would be typical for the Tokyo Quilt Show. But then when you start to look closer, it really offers a lot of inspiration to me as a modern quilter, how you're talking about how that quilting kind of lends a really great organic movement to the quilt, and it extends beyond the piecing into the border, so it's kind of bringing out the negative space into a visual movement towards the center.
Right.
And this quilting, it's a little bit different than traditional hand quilting that we think of in America. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, the Sashiko stitching is a hand quilting. It's very similar to kantha stitching, which is also, it's really an international trend right now. And I see a lot of this kind of stitching in modern quilting as well. And what's really different about this is the shape or the movement of the stitching. Normally with Japanese Sashiko, the stitching follows a very prescribed pattern over the quilt. And this one is just like an explosion of stitching.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of great because it's very structured yet organic all at the same time.
Exactly.
So these fabrics are really common. These indigos and chambrays are common in the Tokyo Show, and we see them a lot in American quilts too. What about this next quilt that you're showing?
Well, the next quilt also uses these recycled traditional Japanese fabrics, probably from kimonos that have been cut up and repieced. And you'll see that in the more solid-looking areas, it's more like a chambray or denim type. And then we also see the movement of the values. The lower left corner has this sweep of darker value, and it creates a real sense of asymmetrical movement.
Yeah, the asymmetrical movement is great, and it also kind of has this bit of an alternate grid work with the color that is something that we see all the time in modern quilts. But the triangle is something that's really trending right now, and you've got another quilt with a great example of how to use triangles that's totally different than this one.
Totally different, right, in terms of color and design and execution. And this is a piece that uses an under quilt that's been pieced, and then it has appliques on top, and it looks chaotic, but of course there's a plan. If you look at it, it's really nicely balanced.
Yeah, I really like how they kind of bring in these stripes, and it's like, it feels very chaotic but controlled, and it seems like it might be improv applique. Is that the technique they used?
I would say so, but you know, what's really striking is that it's so different from the traditional Japanese quilting, which is so symmetrical and ordered.
Yeah. The next quilt you have is Clamshell, which we've been seeing quite a bit here in the US, and this one's a little different because it uses Japanese fabrics.
Right, and you know what these fabrics are is silk kimonos, antique silk kimonos. And a lot of the ladies, they'll go to flea markets, or maybe they have grandma's silk kimono up in their attic, their tiny little Tokyo attic, and they cut it up and make these incredible clamshells.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I love how the use of color in this quilt. They really kind of created great movement with the quilt in terms of how they used color across it.
Definitely.
The next quilt you have is kind of like an homage to the dot or the polka dot. I love polka dots.
Yes, it's like the Great Mother Circle and all the baby dots.
Yeah, so I like how in this quilt they explored the concept of the dot in so many different ways. Like it starts with this huge center dot, and then there's a lot of different things, and even the word dot. And you can see a lot of great things here. There's different values and different colors, and you know, it's very structured, but then they kind of bring in the word dot to provide a little bit of visual interest.
A little whimsy.
Yeah, exactly.
Good. This one, now I want to explain this one to you. In Tokyo, they have a framed miniature category. And so the quilters make these incredibly exquisite, tiny little quilts, but they're just like a whole big quilt. And so this is perhaps these squares, these little wonky log cabins, you might call them, are 2 to 3 inches across.
Oh my goodness.
So just imagine how fine the stitching is on that.
So the pieces must be like a 1/16 of an inch wide.
Yeah, they're pretty
so
tiny.
And that's another thing about the Tokyo show that's so inspiring is the level of piecing that these quilt makers do. It's really remarkable. And I love this because modern quilters first really started to explore the wonky log cabin. And this kind of harkens back to that time to me.
Right,
And
one step further, right?
Yeah, yeah. And the next quilt, I think this is my favorite one of the bunch. It's so graphic and striking. And when you first look at it, it looks like it's the same block, but it's not. Every block seems to be different. I mean, I couldn't really find a difference. And they use machine and hand quilting in it. What's your impression of it?
Well, I just took a long time looking at how those blocks were constructed, and indeed, each one is different, or most of them are a little bit different. But then there's this very even, very symmetrical circle of stitching on top of it, which brings the whole thing together. So there's the very structured graphic, and then the very soft circles of stitching, hand stitching.
Well, I know you have hundreds of photos, so we'll take a look at this last one. This one, it's so graphic to me how they use a lot of different colors, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of a video game.
Yeah.
The way they use it, the 3D of it.
You know, this piece, I think what this quilter did was, he or she, probably a she, got a pre-cut packet and had all these different colors and said, what am I going to do with it? And then mixed it up with black and white and then created a very three-dimensional sense. And as you said, some of those crosses are popping out of the background, giving it that video game look.
Yeah. Well, I have been so inspired by these pictures that Luana has brought back from the Tokyo Quilt Show. It's definitely one of the most amazing quilt shows in the world, and I hope that these pictures can really show you how amazing it is.